Hello, good morning. Can everyone hear me okay? There's a lot of heads. I'm gonna make sure, okay. Good. Let's start by taking refuge. I take refuge in the Buddha, I take refuge in the Dharma, and I take refuge in Sangha. Thank you. I want to open this talk sharing a koan. This is a koan that Bansho shared during Sesshin, and then he shared again last Sunday. And I like, sometimes we get to do this, to keep a theme going and letting it open up. So for those who are in residency, this will sound familiar, and maybe you'll hear it in a different way, or it will touch a different aspect. And then for those of you who are hearing it for the first time, that's great too. Koans are teaching stories in the Zen tradition. They're encounters between two practitioners. Sometimes one of the practitioners is in the role of teacher and one is in the role of student. Sometimes they're both in the role of student. Sometimes they're both in the role of teacher. So this is from the Book of Serenity, case 20. It's called Daizang's Nearness. Daizang asked, "Where are you going?" Fayan replied, "Around on pilgrimage." Daizang said, "Well, what is the purpose of your pilgrimage?" And Fayan replied, "I don't know." And Daizang said, "Not knowing is nearest, or not knowing is most intimate." So when I first arrived at Great Vow, another version of this koan happened. A monk held up an apple and said, "What is this?" And I said, "I won't call it an apple." I'd read that in some koan. And the monk said, "Ask me, ask me." So I was like, "Okay, what is this?" And he takes a bite out of the apple. Intimate. Quite intimate. But that, oh my gosh, I fell in love with Zen in that moment. I was like, wow, this is what you're doing, like that kind of spontaneity, freedom, playfulness. I feel like that often happens towards the end of a retreat, whether we're doing a day of retreat or a week of retreat or 10 days of retreat. Towards the end of retreat, we really touch that playfulness. Like, oh, there's play. There's play in this practice, even though it seems so serious and everybody isn't even making eye contact and we're sitting in this room super still, like there's play. And I feel like we titled this retreat that we're ending, Love and Spaciousness. And I feel like as we begin to touch into the spaciousness that is our nature, we begin to like touch that quality of play. Oh, there's choice here. I'm not fused to these thoughts and beliefs that arise in my mind, although sometimes they can feel like prison. There's some play. I can interact with them. I can have space from them and feel more of what else I am. So back to this koan, I really love this koan. When Bansho brought it during Sesshin, I was very moved by it. So this koan, like, it really centers on this question, like, why did you come here? Like, what is the purpose of your pilgrimage? A little bit of the backstory is Fayan needed a place to stay. He's on pilgrimage, it was raining. So he stays at Daizang's place, and Daizang's the teacher. And so he's just inquiring, like, okay, you're doing this pilgrimage. Like, do you know why you're doing this pilgrimage? But this question, I mean, here we are, right? We're all at this monastery. Maybe some of you didn't even know you were coming to a monastery. Sometimes I think that during a these weekend retreats. Like, do people know this is a monastery? Like, people live here and practice here all year long. So here we are. You came to a monastery. We came to a monastery. Whether you've been here for 10 years, or you come every Sunday, or you were here for the retreat, or this is your first time ever being in a monastery, here you are. Why did you come here? What are you doing here? What is your intention? We ask these questions of each other, and we probably, if you signed up for this retreat, ask these questions of yourself, or as you were sitting during the retreat, we're asking these questions of yourself. Why did I come here? This hurts. And often we want to have a good answer, a good reason. Oh, if I could just articulate what it is, then I could figure it out, or then I could explain it to my parents. I'm still working on that one. Why did you ordain? Don't know, Mom. But Hogen Roshi, when I first moved to the monastery, actually when I first started practicing, I was going to grad school in Portland, and I would come every Sunday because I wanted to do Sanzen, which is the one-on-one meeting with the teacher. And I didn't know why I wanted to do Sanzen. I just remember, that was why I wanted to go. I wanted to go so that I could meet with the teacher. And every time I walked in the room, he would be like, "Why are you here?" And I would be like, "I don't know." It wasn't the same kind of "I don't know" as Fayan. But I would leave like feeling seen in a way that no one else in my life saw me. Like, he saw my aspiration. He was asking me to articulate it, but maybe he wasn't actually. He was acknowledging something that was there and helping water this aspiration that I had that made no sense to me, given my cultural background and where I came from and all of the beliefs that I had taken on from my parents and my society. Like, why do I want to sit in a room with a bunch of other people in silence? What is this practice calling me towards? So Fayan says, "I don't know." And this "I don't know" in Zen, of course, it can mean so many different things. Maybe he doesn't. Maybe he was like me, "I don't know, don't ask me." Or maybe it's coming from wow, I really don't know. This world is vast and wide. Thoughts come through my mind. I could pick one up and I could give words to it, and that doesn't quite touch the why of pilgrimage. That doesn't quite touch the why of coming to retreat. Doesn't quite touch the why of practice. So you might get these questions when you come home. What happened during your retreat? Why did you go to that monastery? How was your retreat? What did you learn during your retreat? And maybe we're also attempting to answer those questions right now. And so I invite you to take up this koan. What if we don't have to know? What if it's allowed to be a little inconclusive? What you got out of this retreat? What if this experience, whether it's of retreat or of zazen or of being a human, doesn't translate easily into a finely written sentence or paragraph or blog post? What if it's still cooking, still rooting, in process? What if no word or concept or image could ever adequately capture it? And what if that's true about every moment of experience? And yet, here I am saying a bunch of words, pointing at something, and maybe that's what words can do. It can bring you in like, yes, that not knowing, that touches something. So not knowing, it really rests at the heart of this practice of Zen. Not knowing, there's another koan that says not knowing is blankness, but this not knowing is a step beyond words or concepts, labels, stories about experience. It's a step into the full richness of. So it's not the not knowing of blankness, like, oh, I don't know, I'm just gonna close my eyes and go numb. But it's the not knowing of like, how could I know? Knowing is so limited. Not knowing is permission to feel our lives. In our instructions for Zazen, we're invited to take the backward step. And I often think of that as stepping back from the content of thought, from the plans, from the ways we try to organize reality to make it work for me or us, to get what we think we want in a given moment. Which is often, so often when we're in that place of strategizing or trying to make reality work for us, we're reacting to something that's happening in the present moment, happening in our experience. And it's pretty natural to come to retreat with an agenda. I remember my first retreat I was like, oh, I'll do this retreat and then I'll figure out if I should go to grad school or not. And so like a lot of time on my cushion was witnessing the mind that would just come up with, oh, if you went and then this could happen, and then this could happen, then this could happen, and then 10 years from now it would look like this and you would feel this way. And then 5 seconds later it's like, or we just changed like one of those thises to that. And it was really striking to see like, oh my gosh, and this is something I think that we can see when we do retreat, because you're like watching the mind. It's like, wow, I'm so concerned about how I will feel 10 years from now. I'm not even feeling how I feel right now. So why does it even matter how I'll feel 10 years from now? I'll be thinking 10 years from then. And that was great to catch. That was so great to catch. And then I was able, during the course of the retreat, to peel my attention from that anxious part of me. That was the part that was so concerned. And that was the part that had been running my life, always concerned about what's it gonna feel like in the future. And I realized, oh, that part of me just wants to get it right. It wants to be safe. It wants me to be safe in the future. And I think through retreat practice, as we peel back from total identification with the content of the mind, the stories of the mind, the planning of the future in this example, we get to see our life for more of what it really is. And in that example, it was seeing that I'm more than just this anxious part of me. That you are more than this anxious part of you. That there's so much more happening in the present moment. And sometimes it can be hard to be with the actual physical experience. And so we retreat to those thoughts about the future. But that's what we're building the capacity to, and that's what we build the capacity to do through Zazen, through meditation, through retreat practice. So this retreat, we were exploring spaciousness and attention. And this is a resource that we all have, and often a resource that we forget about. But spaciousness and attention, they're like actually like the core, the ground of who we are. And we're actually always utilizing this function of our being. But sometimes, and a lot of the time, especially if you're fairly new to practice, our attention collapses around a thought and we identify with what it's saying, like my anxiety into the future example. So if it's a critical thought, our world can take the shape of criticism. If it's a fearful thought, our world can take the shape, or we're seeing through the eyes of fear, anxiety, paranoia. And this can also happen with a feeling. Our attention collapses around a feeling of pain or shame or anxiety, and we're either totally identified with that pain or we're strategizing on how to get rid of it. Those are often the two reactions. We're either fused with the thought or the feeling, or we're trying to get rid of it, which ends up becoming a struggle, a fight. Meditation practice invites us to see or begin to notice that even in the midst of that collapse or apparent collapse, there's space. There's space around, between, before, below any thought or feeling. One way we were exploring that during this retreat was just becoming aware of the space in the room. We can be so object-oriented as human beings. And so we forget that there's space. We forget that there's space in our minds. We forget that there's space in our environment. But actually, like without space, we couldn't distinguish each other. We couldn't walk. We couldn't hear. We couldn't see. Like space is vital, and it's always present. Even in a tight quarters, there's space. There's space around the body, and there's space around thought. I remember when I was first getting introduced to this teaching, I had this image of like, oh, I can climb up on my thoughts because I'm so used to being identified with them or trying to get rid of them, but I could imagine climbing up on them and then looking at the space of the mind. And it's like when we're identified with thought, it's just like the mind feels that big, however big the thought is. But when we remember, like, oh yeah, my mind, the one who's aware of thought, is spacious. We can start to have a felt sense of that space. Someone talked about like taking up space. I really love that. I really love like that we can do these like secret practices once you learn them. So you can walk into a room and you can become the space of the room, and no one has to know that that's your inner experience. And so you can feel that spaciousness, or you can walk outside and let your awareness be as big as the sky. And then anything that's happening is happening in that context. You're held by the sky. We're always, even if we can't see it, we're held by the sky. We're held by the space of the room. We're held by, that's actually the space of our awareness. So it's often said in the meditation tradition, spaciousness is the ground of our heart and mind. We often make thoughts or feelings the ground, and then we build a whole house around them, or on top of them. A whole story about who I am or who you are, what that means. And Zen practice is inviting us. It's like saying like, hey, wait a minute. Before you get so certain about the meaning of this or that. What if you didn't know? What if you came back to the ground that's below that thought or surrounding that thought? What if you held that thought in spaciousness? And then decide. Then decide if you want to follow it or include its perspective or not. What if you loosen the grip on the story about your pain and instead felt the sensations? And even learn to loosen the grip on the labels that we have about things. And just actually feel the experience itself, which can be so freeing and is often really scary to do. To go towards pain, especially when we have a story about that. Like, oh, this is painful. But like if you peel off the label, this is another one of my favorite practices. You could try it right now, like notice a place where you feel tension, like a small amount of pain or discomfort. And then like imagine that you can like take off that label, because often we're reacting to the label. Our minds and hearts are very suggestive. So if you peel off the label or see below the label and just feel the sensations that you're calling pain or discomfort. And just notice if they change, if you don't have a story about them or a label about what they are. Notice if there's like space around them, even just a little bit. Or let yourself feel those sensations in the space in the room. And this is intimacy, this direct feeling. Feeling below the label, below the story. This is intimacy. And that can happen like in relationship to other people. We can peel back the labels. Byron Katie says we put Post-it notes on people, like our judgments about them, our labels about what kind of person they are because they look like this for 10 seconds while we were in the lunch line. They must be that kind of person. And so it's like, what if you peel off those sticky notes or those labels and just meet the person? Not have to know who they are. It's scary. Like doing it right now, I'm like, whoa, I don't know you. Oh, it's intimate. It's intimate. So that's one of the invitations of Zen, to feel our lives without a story, to meet ourselves, to meet the people in our lives without an agenda. Wow, you mean you're not in my life just to make me feel a certain way about myself? I shared a teaching during the retreat that I called the 6 permissions. It's a teaching from a Tilopa, a great Tibetan meditation master, that's traditionally called the 6 nails. I feel like these reminders call us back to the direct experience of being human. They remind us that we aren't solely our thoughts or even our experiences. We are an abiding spaciousness that is the foundation of love, uncomplicated. So I wanted to remind and say the 6 permissions or the 6 nails more directly. I was saying them and giving a little commentary last night when I read them or recited them. So the first one is, you don't have to think about the future. You could just try these on right now. You don't have to think about the future for this moment. That's often how I say them to myself. You don't, for this moment or for this meditation period, you don't have to think about the future. You don't have to think about the past. It's the second one. For this moment, you don't have to think about the past. You don't even have to think about the present. For this moment, You don't have to think about the present. For this moment, you don't have to figure anything out. For this moment, you don't need to make anything happen. And then the last one, just rest. There's permission to just rest. And sometimes we need to take away those other 5, because that's what the mind wants to do. We sit down. So these are great reminders for Zazen. This is kind of the basis of my Zazen practice, or for meditation. Because we often enter a period of practice with some agenda. Some plans that we feel like need to get worked out, even though we might not come, like we sit down on the cushion and we're like, oh, I'm going to follow my breath. And then the mind's like, but you need to think about what's going to happen this afternoon. Or how are you going to respond to the person if they call and ask for this? Or da-da-da-da. So we often have these agendas arise during meditation. Things that feel like they need to get worked out, or something that happened earlier in the day or yesterday or years ago that we feel like we need to rehearse or rehash. Or even that we have to think about our present moment experience. And this can be an interesting, like, subtle nuance in meditation. Like, sometimes we think in order to pay attention to something, I have to think about it. Or we can come to meditation like with this, in the back of the mind idea of like, I'm going to get something out of this. If I sit for 5 minutes a day, I'm going to feel calmer, I'm going to feel better, I'm going to be more spacious. And then we get up and don't feel that way immediately and are like, oh, this isn't working. Don't even have to think about the present. One of my first long retreats here, I remember going to see Hogen Roshi in Sanzen, Dharma discussion. And I said, how can I let go of my thoughts? Who would I be? Who would I be if I wasn't continuing this narrative? Because I was realizing like that's what my thoughts are doing. Like even these thoughts about the present, like I need to keep doing them, right? Or what would happen? I'd disappear. You wouldn't recognize me. And he met me in that inquiry, like, yes, exactly. Who would you be? Who would you be if you didn't have to think about the present? And that left me just so fascinated. For most of my life up to that point, I thought it was necessary to keep some thought stream going. That's how I stayed connected to myself. That's how I knew what was going on in my mind. But I think many of you tasted during this retreat what true connection feels like. That we are so much more than our thoughts. And healing can happen, that sense of wholeness can happen when we let ourselves feel our feelings without thinking about the story of our feelings, or feel our breath without having to run a narrative about how the breath is right now, or to listen to sounds without thinking about the sounds. Many people come to the monastery and say, it feels like I'm coming home. And there's this sense of coming home to ourselves. And that home within ourselves, or as we say in Zen, home to our true self. When we return to being actually here, and this here isn't the monastery, it's like here, which you get to take the monastery with you, or the sense of home with you, because it's never apart from you. We lose connection to it because we start identifying with the stories or the future or the past. And so this is like a returning to that ground. coming back to ourselves. Well, for those of you who are ending the retreat, these 6 nails or 6 permissions are still relevant outside of the Zendo or meditation mat. Even when thinking about the future and the past and the present is part of life. They're reminders to check ourselves. Like, do you really need to rehearse that conversation 18 times, 100 times? Or write that email in your head over and over? I've caught myself so many times rehearsing a conversation that never happens. Because when I meet the person, they're a unique human being with feelings and emotions and eyes and ears and all the things that I wasn't imagining in my conversation because it was just about me. And like I'm, responding to them. And so there may be things that I want to say, but like it's not going to go the way that my mind thinks it was supposed to go. It's often, the more present I am, the more I show up in my life, like in the present moment, connected to my heart, connected to loving kindness, not knowing who the other person is, like a little more free of my ideas about this person. Something mysterious happens when we connect. And it might not go the way I thought it should, but I can be with that too. And that's actually a more real experience than trying to manipulate and get what I want. And then that never feels good anyway. Like, oh, I got what I wanted, but I feel really weird. Like I just did something that didn't feel good. So, what if we didn't know? Or made space for not knowing? Not knowing how the other person might respond, not knowing like what their facial expression means in this moment, not having to know even what happened. Sometimes the mind is like rehashing something that happened 10 years ago. What if we don't really know? The more I practice, the more I can trust that my assumptions about other people often aren't accurate, that my memory of the past is limited, that my stories about the way things are always partial. And that's freeing, actually. Like learning to trust that wasn't like, oh, suddenly I realized that my stories are limited, my assumptions aren't accurate, and my memories of the past aren't always true. I'm free. It was like, oh my gosh. It's a reckoning. It's a bit of a reckoning. And it's a learning to trust. It's a learning to trust, wow, I can abide in my present moment experience and I don't have to always have it figured out. And that things actually, like there's more play. There's more play in life when I can let go of some of those. Even just a little bit. We talk about continuous practice a lot in Zen. And of course, like as you go back into your lives, like many of us are in charge of creating agendas or organizing meals or organizing groups of people or planning events and travel. So the question isn't like, oh, you should just stop doing all of those things and live in the moment. It's like, what does continuous practice look like in the context of your responsibilities, of the roles that you need to assume, given the commitments that you have in your life? When can you practice not knowing? When is not knowing actually the medicine? And when do you need to take up knowing? Oh, actually, I do know how to use this hammer. And, and it's good that I know how to use it. And when, like, where can you bring more spaciousness into your life? Or where can you weave loving kindness into your life? That was the other theme of this retreat. So we want to end with a poem. I shared this during class night at the monastery. It's a modern translation or interpretation of one of the poems by one of the first early Buddhist nuns. It was her awakening poem. Her name's Mita, which translates as friend. Full of trust, you left home and soon learned to walk the path, making yourself a friend to everyone and making everyone a friend. When the whole world is your friend, fear will find no place to call home. And when you make your mind your friend, you'll know what trust really means. When you make your mind your friend, you'll know what trust really means. Listen. I have followed this path of friendship to its end. And I can say with absolute certainty, it will lead you home. Thank you. So we have a few minutes. I'm curious if anybody has any comment or question. Yeah, Shogetsu. Rem, can you grab that microphone?
There's a button at the bottom of it. That clear.
It's on green.
Yep.
Where else?
That one right by your red tab. Clicks. Hold it.
Yeah.
Just a serendipitous happening that this morning as I was waiting for Sanzen, I had stepped out with the baby, and so I didn't know whether Sanzen was going to be with Kisei or with Bansho. And I realized that because I didn't know who I was going to be talking to, I couldn't be imagining what I was going to say, what I was going to ask, how they would respond, and how I would respond, and all of that. And so I was able to be sitting in the Sanzen line without knowing, and then go into it and be present. And it was delightful. So
Who was it?
it was Bansho, I think. I'm not sure.
Thank you. Maybe we should do that more, just not announce who it's with. Well, thank you everyone for your practice. It was a beautiful retreat, and I feel really grateful to share this practice with all of you.